Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our March meeting, Policy Leadership Group. Let me begin by reading this memorandum from Commissioner Miller to Chairman Sharp. Please be advised I'm out sick today and will not therefore be in attendance at the Wednesday, March 26th workshop. Please read this reason in the absence of my records. So read. You have your agenda on first. We have a lot to go through today. As you know, we're going to continue our work through the various key economic spaces. Before that, however, I'll ask Mr. Merrill, County Administrator, to give you an update and overview of the full project and where it's going. So, Mike?
Thank you. I wanted to just kind of take a step back a little bit and kind of look at the bigger picture here. Those that maybe feel like things aren't moving fast enough, or maybe you can't see the end, which is understandable after all this time, I thought maybe I could take a shot at it. So I'm the opening act, and for better or worse, let's give it a shot. So, charting a course forward. I think what for all of us transportation for economic development means is just really a couple of key principles. More and better paying jobs, increased value for residents and businesses, enhanced cultural and entertainment opportunities, and really developing learning and job skills. And crucially, through cost-effective, convenient, reliable, safe mobility, whatever that turns out to be, whatever you all decide that's going to be. And what it will be, I would offer, are the things that are shown here, which really I think have to be in the forefront for us. They have to be consumer-driven, what the customers want. They have to be equitable, both in terms of where the projects are distributed and how they're paid for, multimodal, flexible, to adapt to changing technology, innovative, integrated, which is the discussion of governance, affordable, reliable, because folks won't continue to use it if it's not reliable, and timely. As we all know, time is not our friend. Taking a stab at trying to portray what I think we're all agreed on is, of course, jobs, economic development, and for two reasons, it's proven that more jobs, better paying jobs, economic development are the best remedy for poverty and crime, and transportation infrastructure is critical to that effort. Borrowing some of Mayor Buckhorn's speech yesterday, I think it was really on point, and it's something that we all don't think about often, but transportation doesn't pay for itself. And that goes for roads, goes for transit. When you fill up at the gas tank, the gas taxes you pay don't even come close to paying for the roads and the intersections. So the notion that somehow we're going to come up with a solution that's going to pay for itself, I think is important to acknowledge. That's not going to happen, and that's why there has to be some funding gap that's filled up. We also need to make the best use of what we have, optimizing existing assets, and again, coming back to equity, both in mobility and funding solutions. And our favorite topic, the governance topic, which we'll have to wrestle sooner rather than later. I think the other thing that has been maybe of concern, or at least of interest to some, is how does this all fit together? And just acknowledging for those listening and for everyone who's been part of this, we have had all of the agencies at the table with us at one point or another. And the agencies, which I'm calling the Interagency Mobility Constellation, include all of the usual suspects. So FDOT, HART, Tampa International Airport, Port Authority, Expressway Authority, MPO, Planning Commission, and TBARDA. I mean, those are kind of the stars that have to align in the sky for us to make this happen. And whether or not it's HART or whether it's some other agency, they need a seat in this constellation to be able to act as an equal, as a peer, with authority and accountability to pull this off. So we've spent a lot of time taking you down in the weeds over the last few meetings, talking at about economic development areas or key economic spaces. In each of those presentations, we talked about specific projects and given you lists of projects. This is kind of a way, again, to step back and summarize what it is we've shown you, including what Lucia is going to tell you in a moment. On the short-term side, we proposed 55 intersection improvements, 8 intelligent traffic solutions, a BRT demonstration project, 11 miles of bike and ped trails, 18 circulator buses or route enhancements, and a spine network and existing unfunded capital improvement projects. On the long-term side, we've proposed to use 17 new bus rapid transit express routes, 29 road expansion projects, a high-speed ferry, looking at existing CSX rail or new light rail, mobility transit facility, and again, a spine network. So all of those pieces of paper that we've been shuffling in front of you boil down to this kind of menu of things that we are proposing. Yet to cost out completely, that's coming down the road, but this kind of gives you a sense of what it is we're talking about. Boil down even further into these key building blocks of facility or intermodal types. It's important because all of those projects that I just enumerated for you then get translated into so what? So what about these projects? What difference does it make? This is the difference that it makes. What our folks have done is said, if we do these projects, or some of them, or all of them, this is the difference it will make to reducing congestion. So in each of the key economic spaces that are listed across the bottom, for example, CSX I-75 Sable Park Corridor, if we were to do the projects that we proposed, it would result in a change in congestion of just about 65%. And you can go down the line for each of the key economic spaces to see the improvement in traffic flow or the reduction in congestion, however you want to look at it, if you were to do this menu of project selections. So getting back to my opening statement, which is where are we going, and we are rapidly approaching the end point here. There's a few key steps that need to be done. One is a consumer survey, and we'll be talking about that today. That would be more of a generic survey, getting some initial feedback from our consumers. Second would be a key step, propose mobility funding and governance solutions in June and July. So these, we're thinking, will be some preliminary decisions that you will make about mobility choices, projects, funding choices, and governance solutions, but still in a proposed format, because we want to take those then out to the public again for public engagement so they can respond to something other than just concepts. They can say, here's what the leadership is thinking, here's how it fits together, here are the pieces, what do you think about it? Or what do you think we should do differently? Or why doesn't this make sense, or why does it make sense? So it really helps, I think, folks who are going to respond to that survey respond to something that is tangible. A frame has been set, the picture has been kind of sketched in, but not completed. Once we finish that public engagement, then it would come back to you, and these can all happen, sooner, but this is kind of what we think is realistic. Bringing then back to you the final funding solutions for you to say, as a leadership group, here's what we think we need to do in terms of project selection, funding selection, and governance selection. And once that happens, then decisions about timing of referendas or standing up a new organization that's going to be the implementer, all those decisions can then begin to happen. Now, in terms of deliverables, to see how these come together, it's really 3 deliverables that we're asking you to come together to decide on. One is mobility funding solutions, which will include public and private techniques, equity, and also the provision for local and opportunity projects. By that I mean that what we've been talking about are spine and spine network projects. We also know that each jurisdiction has other CIP transportation projects that you still need to fund and complete. So as an analogy, when we did the community investment tax as a community, and this goes back a ways, 20 years or so, but the way that it was done is that the revenue that was to be collected was carved up into chunks. The first piece went to fund bonds that were issued to build Raymond James Stadium. Pay off the debt first on the stadium, and that was turned out to be about 8% of total CIT collections. The next step was 25% of the remaining revenue went to the school district for their use. And then what was left was split up by jurisdiction based on the population formula that's used for sales tax distribution, recognizing then that everyone had their own needs, their own capital needs. So if we were to do something similar to that, and let's just pretend for a moment that it's a sales tax, and I hope no one shoots me while I'm standing up here, but let's just pretend it's a sales tax, and I'm not saying we're going to do a sales tax, but we have specific spine projects, the big heavy lifting projects and spine network projects that, again, you all will propose and the public will help us decide on. So we set aside a chunk of that sales tax to fund those projects. What's left could then be carved up based on a population formula or even specific projects for use by each jurisdiction to complete their capital needs for transportation. And perhaps even setting aside a fund for opportunity projects for economic development when we have to attract and give incentives to attract a company. So that would be one way to look at the funding piece. The next is the governance solution, which means coming up with an architecture for that corporate entity. Forgetting for a moment who it is, take that out of the equation. Best practice, and we'll hear about this later, we've looked around the country. The best practice that we've been able to find is you need an agency that's going to be accountable and given authority and the ability to deliver the kind of large community transportation projects that we're talking about here. And that requires some sort of corporate architecture. It requires a leadership structure, a board structure, and a CEO. It requires a definition of role and scope. How are you going to limit that agency's authority? How are you going to expand it? How will they interact with all of the other constellation of participants that I showed you? Authority and accountability being the most important. How are they going to be accountable to all of us? The last is mobility solutions, which again, multimodal transportation projects, local, regional mobility partnerships. Those all then have to come together in a way that deliver a return on investment, a plan for execution, and provision of adequate assets, financial resources to deliver. All of that should help us achieve economic prosperity. As we've gone through the projects that we've delivered to you today, or so far, this is kind of the hierarchy of how we've looked at them. Public safety being at the very top, then enhancing and preserving existing assets to make sure that all of the money we have spent on transportation assets don't go to waste by allowing those assets to deteriorate. Third, economic development engines, regional interconnectivity, and spine-to-spine network. So that's been the way that we've tried to look at projects as we've built the project list for you. So now, our funding plan. Premium tolls, so it's a joke. A way to enforce collection of tolls with a Gasparilla theme. Just kidding. So possible funding solutions really, I think, fall into three buckets. One being existing revenue, which doesn't take us very far, frankly. Most of us, cities and county, are using our gas taxes, are using our ad valorem to the maximum ability. P3 opportunities are all the things that we've heard about and are sort of the classic opportunities to engage with private corporations to build, finance, operate, manage large-scale transit or large-scale projects. And then finally, new revenues. And you can see then below that, an enumeration of what some of those are. Existing revenue being gas taxes, CIT, ad valorem existing grants, P3, tolls, transit, multimodal facility, which has a lot of opportunity for P3 because typically those facilities have a lot of commercial retail kind of infrastructure built around them or in them. And transit-oriented development, new revenues, additional tolls and premium access charges. Transportation utility is something that's being used elsewhere in the country, like a water sewer utility, like an electric utility. Social impact bonds, a new technique that's being used. Sales tax or investment plan, mobility fees, and special assessments. So the illustration of maybe a picture of what this governance entity might look like that I've identified in the center here, again, not putting a label on it in terms of a name, but a governance entity that would be responsible for perhaps three things: bus, rail, and intermodal facilities. Intermodal facilities means not just the building in which people change modes of transportation, but also things like zip cars, bicycles, taxis, other kinds of things that move people from a terminus, from a place where they get off a bus or a train, to their workplace, which is important, especially in Florida when it's raining or it's hot. So a governance entity then that could take advantage of the funding sources up above, federal and state grants, operating revenue, including fares, tolls, fees, development, advertising, licensing, and investments by public and private entities, both in the form of equity and taxes through P3s. That entity then having basically four missions. One is real estate development management as it relates to transit-oriented development or to the infrastructure that's needed to run the system. A design, engineering, construction management feature, P3 operators, and then a way to relate back to other agencies, THEA, the cities, the county, FDOT, because there will be times when they have to interact with each other in a particular transportation project. So, you know, what defines success is really what we're here to decide, and these are some of the tools that we have tried to give to you and to work with you. Hopefully this has been helpful to kind of bring it back to an overall picture. So with that, questions or turn it over to Lucia.
I'd just like to ask a quick question. Has your management group, I guess that's what you call them,
Yes.
have you started to look at those 10 agencies that we listed at the last meeting to see, or can we ask you to look at those and to start to put together some scenarios of where things could work more collaboratively or say within under the new governance structure or under the county, under the cities, something like that, and come back to us and give us some possible suggestions about what you think would work.
For the governance solution?
Well, just for, and I guess I'm going to give you an example. Like, for instance, MPO. It's different in a lot of places across the state. And quite frankly, some areas I see it working a lot better than it is here in isolation. So I guess I would like to just say, can your group look at situations like that and come back to us with maybe, you know, get us to start to think about within this governance solution, how will these other 10 agencies fit into?
Sure. Happy to.
Is that clear?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
Any other questions, Administrator?
Not really a question, but really more of a comment regarding what you started out with, respect to the funding model or how what's been proposed as far as separating projects and things like that. I'm sorry. I think it's critically important that when we get to the point of setting up the structure and funding, that capacity exists for future needs that we may not be able to anticipate today. And I can tell you that I'm certain that future boards and elected officials are going to want to have the flexibility and the ability to, to make improvements that, again, sitting here today, we may not be able to anticipate. Secondly, I like the ideas. I think you referenced it or referred to it as an opportunity fund, but I think that we certainly need to set aside a certain percentage of dollars that will allow us to enhance and incentivize economic development. I mean, similar to what we did with Amazon and Bass and hopefully some other projects down the pike.
I definitely agree with Ken's statement on the opportunity fund. To me, that's a big component,
And that could be one of the discrete buckets that's actually established to deal with the revenues as they come in. At a certain point, dollars flow into that opportunity fund as a way to be sure that it's there.
You opened with a statement which the mayor made yesterday at his State of the City address, which I thought was very helpful, which is that transportation doesn't pay for itself, but it does generate a lot of economic return. Who's doing the analysis with all the new data that's coming out that's showing billions of dollars of development along existing corridors and newly established corridors? Where are we going to get the information, and how can we make sure that information is available as we try to explain to citizens here why we're going to be investing in transportation?
That's what Ron Barton's group is doing, and we'll be prepared to do that. And I hope we'd have it today, but be prepared in May at your next meeting in May.
Excellent. I think it's a great presentation.
Yeah, it was an excellent start. I mean, this kind of, the timetable, I think we're needing a timetable, so it's good.
I would ask that perhaps at each meeting we open with something like this, which gives us an opportunity to, each time for us and everyone else, to explain what we've been doing and how it's all coming together. That was very helpful.
I was going to show you a video that I saw, but I won't take the time to do it. It was a video of the bus rapid transit system in Guangzhou, China, which actually got the International Award for Sustainability as being one of the best BRT systems in the world. And as I was looking at it, I was thinking, this is kind of like our version of the Soviet-American space race. It's like after Sputnik went up, and I'm thinking, no disrespect to the Chinese, but if the Chinese can do this, we can certainly do it.
Yes.
And by the way, we compete with the Chinese. I mean, so they have this beautiful BRT system that's just top-notch, and I think we can do that.
Well, and Mike, hopefully you're not suggesting their governance model for us in order to solve that problem.
Actually, I am. I think that's the best model.
You are?
That's the best model.
Interesting.
That's why I didn't want to show the video.
A quick question. I think one of the slides that you had, probably a little bit further up, which showed, no, not that one. I think
Towards the
more towards the end.
Oh, towards the end.
Yeah, where you showed the three, not those, further back, where you showed that you talked about rail, bus, and then also transit-oriented development. What I'm seeing, and this is you went back too far. What I'm seeing, based on what you've got there, is that really and this is just based on my reading of all this, is that transit-oriented development is really the thing that we're looking for to develop these key economic spaces, and that what we could do without even changing governance, in all honesty, is we could probably set up, in partnership with HART, the county, and the city, a transit-oriented development department or division where they all talk with each other only about economic development issues as it relates to transit-oriented development. And the reason why is that most of the more successful transit systems out there have extremely large transit-oriented development departments. And what they do is they actually are involved in the real estate development of all these areas as owners and partners with private entities. A P3 approach, when it comes to both running it or helping to help fund it, still needs that underlying governmental or taxing base that they don't have access to. Their partners are true partners, meaning that you give us some of this money, we're going to figure out how to leverage it as much as possible. We're going to be equal partners, or at least partners in terms of how we build it, and then you're going to be the beneficiary because those dollars will go back into helping to not only develop but expand the system. So I think we may, when all is said and done, and it doesn't have to be right now, but I think when it's all said and done, I think that's where we're going to get back to, because you made a point about China. China's governance model is not what makes it work well. in a way, I guess it is, there are certain incentives or disincentives for not actually doing what they tell you to do. Here, we don't have as many of the disincentives, so we need to make sure that when we look at governance, I'm always on the side of how do we make government work and leverage with private entities and actually make this stuff work. Because I think that's the most important thing we can actually look for.
Absolutely. And it's the way to generate revenue to help pay for all this. too, through
Absolutely,
transitory
absolutely.
development. All right, yep.
Well, Lucia's coming up, getting set up. Let me just sort of remind you where we're at today. Lucia will be presenting. Your mic on. Lucia will be presenting Plant City, Terrace, and USF. We're filling in this spine network, and our next meeting will complete the fill-in of that. And out of that, we'll be drawing really significant consolidated projects, those sort of things that Mike gave you some overview today. So what you saw today is through this far, we still have it. Mike Williams has been making this presentation because most of the areas we've been doing so far have been sort of commercial industrial. Today, we're moving to those key economic spaces that have more of a live, work, play dimension. So we're going to ask Lucia to present those. So this is what we're covering today. And Lucia, we're just about ready here. My whole job was just to stall, so and I did it too slow or too quick, so I'll have to tell you all about my cows. Cattle market's doing great. It's really a good time. Please eat more beef. Any of you who are vegetarians in the room, please leave, because it's a wonderful day in the cattle business. Hopefully it'll be a wonderful day here in the transportation business, but perhaps not in the computer business here. So.
I can take it while we look for the PowerPoint. I think what Mike talked about, the mobility solutions, the funding solutions, all really come together in the three things that we were analyzing, and that really is how transportation, land use patterns, and job creation come together. So as we talk through the communities today, and we've talked through a number of them, but the key economic spaces we'll be addressing today deal with New Tampa, USF, Temple Terrace, and Plant City. You'll see that each one is very different. Each one has a different land use pattern, but the one thing that you'll see in each one of them is that enhanced bus service and enhanced transit service really is required to make those areas work functionally and really get the optimal potential for economic development and developing work-play communities. Now I'm really in trouble because I
I think it's time for a sermon, Mayor.
All preached out.
Give your speech again.
I'm done. Pass the hat.
I
Run
think-
it off of here, the slides aren't all, the fonts are a little bit different.
That's fine.
It may be in Lithuanian.
Everybody does have this PowerPoint. You do have the PowerPoint in hand.
Yeah.
So Lucia, they have it in hand. So.
If you do have it in hand, then we'll just walk through it, and I think most of the audience has it as well. So here it is. The piece that we're doing today are the four areas that I mentioned to you today, and we're going to start with this page that's called the process.
What page number is it?
It's the first page after this one that says Transportation for Economic Development. I feel like I'm proctoring the SAT. Now you may open your booklets and turn to the first page. Oh, that brings back awful memories, huh? So we have the process, and we have been talking about four things coming together, really looking at where jobs currently exist, where they tend to cluster together, and we've called those the key economic spaces. We then looked at what was called the character of the transportation network, and you've heard the word spine and spine network. And spine network, spine especially for those folks who have been listening, connect us to the rest of the region because they are something that the state has identified. They are strategic intermodal system roadways, railroads, and other modes of traveling, but they really are our connection to the rest of it. And then the piece that is the spine network is what connects us. So it really is connectivity that travels from our local area to the rest of the areas. The next slide really does talk about, oh, the next slide, please. Thank you. There we go. Way more comfortable this way. The next slide really does talk about the process that we have been talking about, and that is evaluating, assessing the land use patterns, how they relate to the spine network, and how they relate to one another. And so we're really talking about improving the reliability, the intermodal connectivity, and then access to the different markets, whether they're internal in the key economic space or whether they then reach out to some of the areas in the region. So we just talked about spine and spine network as being our foundation, and really spine is a very good word if you think about kind of our own bodies and how we connect and how we're all connected. So, and the network being the supplementary or support roads or other modes of transportation. We talked about Port Red Wing, Port of Tampa, MacDill, and Brandon last time, and this time we're going to focus on the 4 areas that I mentioned to you that are really in the north and the east part of the county. And as we talk about these, of course, there's always this piece of the competitive sites that Ron Barton brought to you, and they really are coming together because what we're really trying to do is make these areas competitive for economic development. The first one we're going to talk about is New Tampa in the very northern part of the community. And if you look at North Tampa, it really is focused on the spine. Its main streets are I-75 and Bruce B. Downs. And so as a result of it, and when it developed and where it developed, what you have is a very suburban development pattern. And you have a number of employers in that area that are upwards of 3,000 employees that are coming into the area, but they're driving their automobiles, and many of them are coming from Pasco County. And so these kinds of areas are difficult to retrofit. Tyson's Corner, Virginia has recently undertaken this effort to turn it into a live, work, play area. They've spent a number of years working on it, but right now what we are working with is a fairly suburban development pattern. A number of improvements have been done in this area that have improved the actual road network, Bruce B. Downs. Between Bruce B. Downs and improvements that FDOT has made to I-75, we have about $300 to $400 million worth of improvements that are either underway, have recently been completed, or pending. So that will improve Bruce B. Downs to 8 lanes in many parts, and then the I-75 will be improved. The new Tampa Boulevard to the very north has provided additional access and really does then provide the bridge over 75 has been completed and does provide for an alternative to remove some of the traffic from that area. But improvements here, as we said, since many of the improvements have already been done on the road network, really do focus on improving express bus service along Bruce B. Downs. When Bruce B. Downs was done, it really did contemplate a lane either for bus rapid transit or some sort of transit facility. So there is plenty of space and in the right-of-way and in the road that's been developed along Bruce B. Downs. So we envision enhanced bus service there, but also the shaded areas to the north and into the northeast and to the southwest really are for enhanced bus service, but these are then flex service or circulators that provide internal support to those areas, and the other ones connecting outside of those areas. The next one is the USF area, and as we move into USF, you will see it very different than we had with the New Tampa area, where New Tampa was suburban in nature. What we have in USF is a very traditional grid pattern, very high-density residential development, and an area that also has a total of over 20,000 jobs when you include USF and a lot of the other employers. There's a lot of medical related facilities that are kindred to the VA hospital, Moffitt, Shriners, University Community, but there are also other and other support and other entities that we would consider target industry related as well. So the 20,000 people that come into work every day typically now are driving their cars. And so this is the kind of area that really does benefit from enhanced bus service, because it then does really support what is a typical grid pattern transportation network. Grids are great. If you've grown up anywhere where you can access grids, you know it's reliable, it's certain distances apart, you can hop on, hop off. But if you start looking at this, the enhancements are not only the transit enhancements that go along major routes, but also so the shaded areas to provide internal circulation as well. However, there are additional road improvements and infrastructure improvements underway. You'll see that a number of them begin to support the grid pattern, the east-west routes. The one to the very north is 131st Street. That east-west road is currently under PD, and we are exploring it. Immediately to the north, too, though, what happens in areas like this is you begin to find more opportunities for bike, pedestrian modes, and so you will see that Fletcher Avenue immediately to the north, while not designated on here, is a project that's being completed to assist pedestrian access across and to reduce some of the traffic incidents that we've had along that route. As well, some of those areas on the green that also are in the southern part and the northern part are for pedestrian and bike access. So really an area where you can start to build on transit-oriented development and include many, many different modes of transportation. Sure.
Quick question. I don't see it, but you have 15,000 employees at USF. Would it be beneficial to, I mean, how many students visit that campus each day?
That's right. And so that the 15,000 employees plus the students, so you really are talking about, I don't know that number, but in addition to that, you know, you have major opportunities to move people in different modes as opposed to just driving in.
The only other number I'd like to see is, I'm just curious, 2,100 Busch Garden employees, how many people visit?
The tourism, right. So we can provide those to you, but I think that's a real key piece of it. Temple Terrace is our third area today. And Temple Terrace, again, too, has this area that we're talking about is to the east of downtown Temple Terrace and the redevelopment and residential neighborhoods, and it really is along I-75 and Fletcher Avenue. So what you see here is a development pattern similar to the one that we saw in the new Tampa area, where there is suburban activity and the kinds of employers that we have here also are supporting the medical industry, but as well as some of the financial industries as well. But here we have another case where folks are driving in, and so enhanced transportation through bus or bus rapid transit or flex service is something that can be really helpful here. This shows the existing bus service that actually starts in Temple Terrace and actually goes downtown, but then there are other areas here that are depicted, not very well visible, but that do provide for some of the internal circulation. Temple Terrace has identified some additional projects that could help economic development. That inverted E that you see is Telecom Parkway. Some of that is already being constructed, but that is really to serve some of the existing and enhanced suburban development that is in this area. And I think the other piece here, though, is the managed lanes on I-75. And I think you will see that here, and you will see that also in Plant City. Those become important spine improvements to move people in and out of the region. Plant City, our fourth key economic space for today, all the way to the east. Plant City really is the bookend of the I-4 corridor in Hillsborough County. You talked about I-75 and I-4 at your previous meetings. This one is our eastern bookend that provides opportunities really geared for moving goods, people along the I-4 corridor. So it really does provide opportunities to move to the east, to Lakeland, and to link up with some of those distribution warehousing opportunities, but also then back into the city of, toward the city of Tampa as well. Really, a lot of the development opportunities here do center around distribution and warehousing, and what you will see in addition to the, these are the, before we go on, these are the major employers, and that there are over 1,100 people that have just been identified, employees that are just identified in these industries alone. But what some of the improvements are then are the improvements to assist in the internal circulation. So these are the area in the stripes is the area that's identified for flex service to carry people within Plant City. And then some of the additional opportunities here for actual infrastructure are to accommodate east-west movement, because Plant City really is focused on east-west movement. So you'll see Sam Allen, improvements to Sam Allen on the north, and US 92 on the south to move parallel to I-4, and that is envisioned to be managed lane as well. And then some newer projects, the one to the east-west road to the very south, to accommodate additional opportunities for development in that area that's currently undeveloped. So those are the highlights of the 4 areas that you have had. Next time we will bring you West Shore, downtown, and the area around the airport. And so that again will be very different and a different set of improvements. But what I'd like to leave you with is the improvements that we are identifying for the jurisdictions of Temple Terrace and Plant City and the cities of Tampa really do come from the jurisdictions themselves. We're working with them. But in addition to roads, as a number of folks have said, we can't build our way out of this. And so you see the transit piece reappearing in different ways in each one of those. And depending on what the land use pattern is and what the potential is, determines really what kind of service can be provided there. So any questions on these pieces? Okay. Not so much. All right, thank you.
While we're getting the next PowerPoint up, let me just take a moment. As you're aware, the current city manager of Plant City, Greg Hordell, is changing his position, and he has the interim city manager here. If you would, Greg, if you'd introduce David. You introduce yourself, David.
I hired this guy 2 times, and now he says, introduce yourself. Yeah. My name is Dave Sollenberger, and I'm the interim city manager in Plant City. And this is the second time I've been there. And it's the second time that I've taken a job since I retired from Sarasota, so it's good to hear. Thank you very much.
It's a new retirement pattern. So, thank you, David. What we wanted to do now is we're continuing our conversation about governance, and what we want to do today is Eric and I just want to illustrate how some other communities are approaching this. These are not things we're endorsing or saying they all ought to be done here, but we really just want to make sure we all have a sense of how other communities do it. So I'll do one, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, excuse me, and Eric will do the other 2. JTA, as it's called, its functions, because what we're really trying to understand is what's the value they add to their community, what roles do they take, because that's the question we ultimately need to come back to you as you all discuss governance here. What's the role that needs to be taken, what's the value that needs to be added? They are a multimodal transit provider. They were originally Expressway Authority. And if many of you remember Jacksonville years ago, if you went anywhere, you stopped continuously because you had to go across a bridge to get anywhere in Jacksonville, and you had to put your quarter in. And finally, the citizenry got really tired of that, so they voted the tolls out and then funded it. And it really became from a merger of the Expressway Authority and a number of private agencies. What's also interesting about them, because they're Expressway Authority, in addition to operating the standard public transit functions, they do road and bridge construction. And when Jacksonville had their equivalent of the CIT, they did a good bit of that. Those funds are not available, so they're not actively building roads and bridges right now. But they have that capacity and skill, and that was one of the functions that they provided there in that. Once they built it, they turned it over to Jacksonville Duval to manage. Their governing body is 7 members. 3 are appointed by the governor. 3 are by the mayor of Jacksonville, and as you're aware, Jacksonville is a uni-government city, county, and they are confirmed by the city council, and then you have the district secretary sitting there. So that's their current governing structure that they operate on today. They're funded from the fare box through grants. They have a 2 half-cent sales tax, 1988, which is the original one, and then in the Better Jacksonville plan, another half-cent sales tax. So that's the sort of funding that they have to work with, and they're, I think they have to go back up for a vote in 2016 or so on one of those half cents. So that'll be up for the public to decide that. So that's sort of a quick overview of Jacksonville transportation. Eric?
For our next 2 presentations, we're looking at 2 organizations that are in the San Francisco Bay Area. And as we travel down the path to today, we've heard people from time to time tell us that we ought to look at San Francisco. So the first one is the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. And in terms of what it does, it was established back in the late 80s with the adoption of a local option sales tax within San Francisco County. And so it largely has been responsible since then for dealing with the allocation of the proceeds from that local sales tax. It serves as a congestion management agency for the state of California designation. It distributes clean air funds. We have on this slide debt management, and I think a key is that this is an organization established by the consolidated city and county of San Francisco, almost changed communities. But the authority is established as a separate entity. So while the 11 members of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors sit on the agency, they have separate staff, they have a separate budget, they have separate operating policies and procedures. They have totally separate bonding capacity for this organization. And so the 7 or 11 members of the board serve on this. This is a county-wide organization. Most currently, they had their second local option sales tax approved in 2003 that took effect in 2004. So that's the major role of this organization, but they also serve as a distribution point for federal and state funds. And they have a $10 annual vehicle registration fee that was another local initiative approved by the voters within the city and county of San Francisco. And so this organization also allocates those funds. They have to be used to benefit the fee payers because, in effect, that's a user fee. Now, in the same town, not too far down from the location of the county agency, is a Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and this organization has evolved over a much longer period of time. From a national perspective, they serve as the MPO for the region. From a state perspective, they serve as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. They coordinate within the Bay Area. I'll stop and say this is a 9-county and multiple city serving organization, and we're not bringing it to you because of that characteristic, but it's an example of a cross-jurisdictional. So the fact that it is broader than that last organization I just mentioned, which is for a single jurisdiction, or the one that Herb mentioned, which is, again, for a single consolidated city-county organization. This is an example where you have representation of multiple governments serving together. They have a leadership and advocacy role on this regional level. They deal with federal and state funds, much as your MPO here has that type of responsibility. They've actually consolidated what might have been multiple local transportation organizations under this one organization, in that they run the toll authority. And so what would have been a separate agency collecting tolls on the bridges in San Francisco, which are owned by the state of California, this organization has that as one of their multiple roles. They coordinate with multiple transit systems in the area. They deal with the intelligent transportation system. They have the 511 information line. They have call boxes on the interstate system within the area that they serve. And so over time, they've evolved and they've taken on additional responsibilities that, but for this consolidation, might have been staffed by separate organizations trying to coordinate across organization lines. So that's a large part of why we thought this might be an example. As I said, 9 counties, that sounds like we're talking about a regional entity, but as I said, we really brought this forward because it's a cross-jurisdictional entity. 16 of the 18 voting members are appointed by the local organizations, and the formula is based on the size. So the 2 largest counties in the Bay Area have a higher area of representation. There are 2 voting members that don't reflect governments but reflect other organizations, as you can see. And then they have 3 non-voting members that provide representation to federal, state transportation agencies and also a federal housing department. Now, one other thing that we wanted to mention, I guess I forgot just to recap. So while that last organization in the Bay Area is dealing with the voter-approved sales tax and the voter-approved vehicle registration fee, this organization deals with the federal grants, the state grants, and the local toll revenues. We also wanted to hand out a document that Greg Horwood all found for us that is a document produced by the Seattle Department of Transportation. It's titled 7 Best Practices for Regional Governance of Transit. It talks about examples from Portland, Switzerland and Germany, and also Boulder, Colorado. So it really deals with the question of why deal with the issue of governance. So we thought that's relevant background reading that you might want to peruse between now and the next time we get together and talk about governance opportunities. Any questions?
So if I'm to understand this, all the government and operating authorities would be transferred over to Plant City and managed from Plant City? And
That's my understanding.
Second that motion.
yes. What about parking fees? The tolls that are generated from parking. I know in San Francisco, for example, in other areas, it's quite expensive. Is that taken into consideration at all?
I don't know that we've come across that here, but there is a document that we can distribute to you. I'll warn you that it's.
And that's not a signal by any means. I'm just curious
Yeah,
as to.
no, there's, and I understand that. There's a document that I came across by Googling innovation and DOT, and I had a hit, and the hit is a document that was produced for state departments of transportation that basically is a compilation of case studies. And what you'll find in the first section of that is, as you've just indicated, there's a variety of funding options, some that they've identified that haven't actually been levied anywhere, others that have, and so they have case studies. But that might be something that gives you a perspective of some of the creative ways that funding is provided for transportation. Now, some of those would take legislative action, and so they may stretch our imagination from what we're possibly considering in the short term. But we can send that document to you, and it also has examples of creative types of projects. Just as back in November, we talked about demonstration projects and how do we optimize existing investments in assets. So we can distribute that, and that's more reading, but mostly it's case studies that you can then refer to if something entices you. And I think parking fees is specifically one of the examples that they had in that, Commissioner Higginbotham.
All right. And I'm not advocating an increase.
We understand. We're not here to advocate.
But I'm just curious as to how that was taken.
But it's interesting because it even talks about insurance rates and how you can look at factoring usage and as I said, some creative financing mechanisms that it looks like some are not yet in place anywhere.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, the $10 vehicle registration fee, is that an example of, Mike, when you presented the utility kind of revenue concept, is that one of those examples of something that maybe, and does the state, we don't authorize the vehicle registration fees, that's done at the state level.
At the state level. The transportation utility, in where it's been done around the country is really, it's based on the concept we're all familiar with, which is traffic generation or trip generation. And the fee is paid per household based on a trip generation formula. And so it's, depending on the jurisdiction, I've seen anywhere from $4 a month up to $10 a month being for a residential unit being the component that's the trip generation or the contribution of a household to.
Like the school impact fee? Because that's
kind
kind of
of.
how they go on a household
Kind of.
basis to decide.
But it looks more like a TICO-type utility or a public utility. And some of them are actually corporate, for-profit, share-held kind of entities. So there's a whole range of things.
Great, thank you.
Eric, on that Metropolitan Transportation Commission, how was that created? Was it
By state law.
it was state law, that's what I thought, okay. Just wanted to make sure of that.
And if I can follow up with Commissioner Mermans, that the state of California authorized congestion management agencies to establish that $10 registration fee in 2009. So based on that, a vote was taken within the city and county of San Diego. Keep wanting to make it San Diego, sorry. San Francisco authorizing that $10 fee.
Well, I guess I'm getting more to the point. This is the third time that we've been going through governance, which is fine. I think the last couple meetings we've discussed different types of concept and ideas. My question to staff is, what do you all need, or what questions need to be answered by us so that you can come back with concrete models that we can begin talking of substance? Because it just seems like, I mean, it's great that we're talking about concepts, what other people are doing, but I'm ready to start putting together and discussing what models we think are going to work.
Our plan is to bring you in May, set of models and make it all continuum. Our plan is to bring you in May, set of models from some continuum from the simplest, easiest to perhaps the most complex. What we're doing with the managers group is we had some ideas, met last week, put some ideas. We're scheduling some more meetings with them so that we can have a good discussion and debate. I would welcome from any of you, if you have a specific model, if you've thought about this, that you'd like to get in there, if you could get that to me or Eric in the next couple of weeks, that would just be helpful. So if you have some ideas that you want to make sure get put on the table, please communicate that. But yes, sir, we will be ready in May to lay out some choices for you.
So I guess a question.
Let me be clear,
Okay.
Commissioner, we're not asking you to decide those in May.
Right.
But we want to put some concrete stuff on the table.
And this was really the closest thing, to it, not a recommendation, but if I can find it here, of what functionally what it would look like, which is, whatever, where are we here?
Slideshow.
Huh?
Slideshow.
Slideshow, there we go. Whatever the agency is, oops, doing this very well, am I? There we go.
There you go.
Okay, and from the current slide. So, basically, it's an agency that has two functions. One is to gather revenue, either directly or by interlocal agreements. So that, for example, if the county commission is the entity that's authorized to levy a sales tax, for example, just like the CIT. So in that instance, a sales tax would come into the county by interlocal agreement. It would be distributed to this governance entity, as well as to some of the jurisdictions, mixed together with other operating revenue like fare box, tolls, advertising, licensing fees, and then further enhanced by federal and state grant revenue, and then investments from public and private. So that then is the one face of the organization to gather the revenue. On the other side, how they spend it is either directly on acquiring buses and building infrastructure, rail, another example, or by engaging in the P3 operators to do certain elements of the multimodal system. And then even further to the right, gets back to the fact that even an entity like this will still need to enter into agreements with cities and counties, the cities and the county, on certain projects because they will overlap. And that happens all the time. The US 301 project that the county commission approved, that was very successful in South County, that was accomplished by an interlocal agreement with FDOT. And so it isn't really a foreign kind of model, but this is basically what it looks like. And the decision is that centerpiece, who is it, what is it, what is its constitutional makeup, and what is its role and scope? And it could be a newly formed agency. It could be Heartline reinvented. It could be, as some have suggested, the MPO, or it could be Heartline married with MPO, or engaged with MPO in a way that now you have the main planning organization designated by the feds connected to a countywide agency, much like you saw in San Francisco, that is now empowered to do all these things in partnerships with other agencies. So, I mean, my answer would be this is what it looks like.
So, but for next meeting, are there any questions that you need to get answered from us or input that you are seeking? So, I mean, I guess what I'm looking for next meeting is for you all as managers to come back to us with maybe 3 or 4 models at the very most to say, hey, listen, these are our concepts, so that we can start giving you concrete feedback and start narrowing this down. Because otherwise it just seems like we're just talking concepts and concepts, which again, I know we have to look at the different options, but I'm ready to start getting into the decision-making mode.
Yeah, and so what we need from you then is, if you look at this timeline here, is if in August and September we're going to be taking out to the public some proposals that are relatively defined, and one of them is governance, we would like you to select maybe 1 or 2 of the things we bring to you and say,
Right.
That's what we want to show the public, get their feedback. So yes.
And the only other feedback that I would have, I just want to make sure the governance model that we have, that we are in control of our own destiny. Obviously, I don't want that to be at the whims of politicals or the state or federal governments. I want to make sure whatever we come up with, that we are fully in control. I mean, obviously, maybe not every single funding source we're going to be able to control the exact amounts that we get, but we need to make sure that the plan that we are presenting the people, we are able to control as much as we possibly can how that plan can be funded, and so that we can present a cost-affordable, feasible plan to our constituents.
Show you that as well.
Thank you.
And just to summarize, things we've heard from you in prior meetings are representation of elected officials is important. Being able to look at the county as a whole and the systems as a whole is important. You know, you don't want a fragmented view. You want to be able to look at it as a whole. So those are other features that we're trying to build in. I would also say, you know, as you look at this map, you know, there are a couple of roles that get real clear here. There's the spine, which you've got an advocacy legislative role for, and then the spine network that you may have a more funding role. So you have given us some good direction about what's important to you. But again, certainly we would invite anything else as you do have that. Any other comments? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hagan, excuse me.
Yeah, a couple comments that jumped out to me. It appeared that on the 3 models that you showed,
Yes, sir.
that economic development and roads are not a part of their mission, or certainly not a priority. That's the way I interpreted the data. And both of those are critical elements, I think, of our discussions that we're having here. Secondly, it also appeared that no elected officials were a part of those organizations. I mean, they said appointed, things like that. So I don't know if that's accurate.
Let me clarify. The San Francisco model is essentially their board of supervisors, which is equivalent to a county commission setting as that.
Okay.
Yes, sir. The other 2 are appointed models. Now, in the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, those are many elected officials from multiple jurisdictions, so it looks somewhat perhaps more like some mix of an MPO or something, but there are elected officials there. The Jacksonville model is not. Those are all appointed people. So.
Okay. I have not formed an opinion on the governance and what model that we should consider. And I'm certainly not going to speak for our entire board, but I'll just say that based on my experience, board comments throughout the last referendum and preliminary comments regarding future TIF extensions that the county commission is going to consider, I strongly feel that the board will be reluctant to designate or create a structure that will reduce or usurp its authority.
Perhaps I could get a little feedback on that. That seems consistent with what you were saying, Commissioner Wagner.
Yes, I agree, totally. And that's what I was going to actually echo those comments from Commissioner Hagan, because this is where the buck stops. You know, with any kind of decision on what kind of taxes are paid by our constituents, we have to, every single person at this table, and that's why we put people here, has to be held accountable. And that goes back to the accountability that Mr. Merrill said earlier. So I definitely echo that and think that whatever we do has to have that authority in it. One comment I did want to make was, I guess I'd like to know, based on what you're going to propose for financing or governance, what authority the state would have over anything that we're devising. Like, I just saw a couple bills relating to our expressway authority that will move their tolling authority away from them. That would be obviously an important consideration for this group. And if we're going to rely on tolls and go to express buses and manage toll lanes, well, of course, a lot of those will be controlled by the state. I think we need to understand what decisions is the state going to have to approve certain things that we want to do, and I don't think I want to go down that road, because that every single year or 2 years with a different elected body going up Tallahassee, we could be at their mercy trying to figure out, where we're going to be with our funding. So
Another way, in addition to funding, it's really local control that's really important.
local control is going to be critical for this group. Absolutely, as moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to underscore that it's the local, we need to make sure, again, as I mentioned, that we are in control of our own destiny, because as Mayor Buckhorn experienced, when he tried to get authority from the state to hold his own referendum, we cannot frustrate ourselves by having to deal with red tape at the state level. That's why when we look at the governance structure, as I mentioned before, taxing authority is going to be important. And so that entity has to, in my opinion, unless I see something differently, that entity has to have taxing authority. So what entities are already existence here within our control has the ability to levy and to control revenues. And that's where I think we need to focus on as the core. We can always reshape missions. We can always reshape boards, or how they're, what they're comprised of. But we've got, to me, that's the central core, is being able to control the revenue streams. And also, I'll comment from and underscore what Commissioner Hagens had mentioned about our authority. I would just also, I'm not going to interpret what he had said, but I will interpret when he said our authority, meaning the authority that we have as a collective community in this room, not only just the county commission, because this transportation issue is not just a county issue. This is a community issue that has to be solved by a community. And so I want to make sure that all of our partners that are here at the table, at least from my perspective, I will speak, know that for me, it's a shared responsibility and shared authority that we all have here as Hillsborough County and as an entire community.
I forgot to ask one thing. Where would the Public Transportation Commission fit? Would be one of those, that list of 10 or 11 agencies? I mean, would they fall under this governance?
We'll look at all the entities per your request that you requested Mr. Merrill earlier, and so the models may or may not. I can't speak to the models because we haven't developed them yet, but we can certainly look at all that.
I mean, obviously, they're involved in transportation and collection of fees and different things. I don't know if that fits with what we're doing, and of course, there's a lot of discussion about that in Tallahassee right now, too. So I think it kind of stood out to me as one that might have been left off that list, as somebody that does contribute in our community.
Per your request, we'll consider that. Any other comments about that? Okay. I'd like to move to our final agenda item. Can you get me up? Public engagement. Jim, what I'd like to do is present to you a two-staged approach. And what we'd like the direction from you today is a sort of go-forward direction with the understanding that it'll be under the guidance of your managers and administrators. We're trying to get this started in April, and we don't meet with you again until late May. So I'd like enough feedback that we're going the direction you want, and then your managers and administrators will guide the details of it. So we're really talking about a two-stage approach. The first stage, which will begin in April, is sort of a kind of transportation needs discussion. We're not going to try to take out specific projects or specific funding ideas at this point. It's trying to reach out to various groups in the community to sort of understand some of their needs, their concerns, et cetera. Stage two would be, as Mike alluded to earlier, the first draft of what we call the business plan. Those three deliverables he showed to you in his, the governance structure, the funding, and the projects. We'd take those out in a first draft form so that folks could have a chance to do it. Some of our rationale behind this is we've had feedback from folks that are concerned that we may bake the product too much before we take it out. So we'd like to go out early with your direction. In our first stage, which would be April 1, we would try to generate basically 3 to 5 basic questions. We've had several suggested to us. What we're proposing is to really take a number of questions and have a survey design expert who's external to us. This is their business, so that we create questions which are truly objective and are not biased in any way. And they may be separate questions for business community and residents, but that would be the mechanism. We're looking at a number of distribution measurements to work with the Chamber or Economic Development Council to get it out to the businesses. We could do robocalls to get a broad sort of feedback. We could distribute to local interest groups that are being concerned about this to let them do their own. And we could do some field interviews with folks out in the community to try to understand stuff. And we can do any other methods that y'all have an idea on. But this is sort of what first stage would be. So if we can get out, get a lot of feedback from folks. You see many of the businesses that we've identified in key economic spaces today and others. Those would be particular targets to try to understand some of their transportation needs and concerns of their employees, our students. Stage two would be the business plan discussion. We would do some of the same analytical techniques that were used after the 2010 referendum in terms of focus groups and interviews and all, but to take stuff out and test. We would propose some town hall meetings that you lead, either live or televised. We would include an option for a scientific survey if you thought it was important at that point. Clearly, the Chamber and other groups can convene briefings. This is the sort of rubber chicken circuit time, go out and speak to groups, et cetera. And we certainly could do stuff on the web. But again, at that point, we have a sort of first draft of something that we actually take out to folks, and they have something they can really react to in terms of content. So the earlier stage is more generic. This is a very specific product that we're stoking. And we're looking at April, June to do those, and then August, September for the first draft is the model we're looking at. I'd like to get some feedback if I could, if you're comfortable with that, anything specifically you'd want to see, if there's anything up we're proposing you don't think's useful split of time, we want to take it off. Commissioner Beckner.
Yeah, I would just say, just make sure, obviously, that the MPO has done a lot of work in their post-referendum survey, so I don't think some of this, we have to reinvent the wheel. And as I think we've, in our conversations before, is let's make sure that we start with the end in mind of what the questions are that we want to have answered, the information that we're looking for that's going to be beneficial. And if we need to invest in a professional firm or we need to put some money into this, let's make sure that we do it right and we don't do it on the cheap. This is a major issue that we're dealing with. So, spending a few $1,000s or whatever it takes to get what we're looking for is going to be critical to me, and I'm willing to support those allocations.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
To follow up on the Commissioner's suggestion, I think particularly when it comes to the data collection, and this is not to denigrate the Chamber's activities or whatever else is being contemplated, but there are political professionals and there are public research firms that do this for a living. That data is important, as Commissioner Beckner said, and it's the way you phrase the questions and the target universe that you pursue is important, and more data is better data to us. And so I would only encourage you to use people who do this for a living, not amateurs, not PR firms, not folks who make T-shirts,
or raise cattle.
I mean, this information is going to be important because as we head down this path, we're going to want to know what people are thinking, and that will frame the discussion moving forward. And so I strongly urge you, and even if it does involve, paying some money to do it, that particularly on the robo-polling, and you can survey a large sample of the county very inexpensively and get an accurate view of where the county is on this. And so I would encourage you to do that.
Certainly do intend to do it at highest professional. Commissioner Hickman?
Yeah, and on the robocalls, I just ask that you not use Pat Boone.
Have a particular voice you really prefer?
Could do Bill Barker,
Yeah.
Bob Barker, I mean.
No, but I agree. You got to have the right people in play, because this is important, and this is one of the criticisms that we had, and I was a leading critic, that public wasn't engaged, and we're doing that, and that we weren't outlining a plan, and we're doing that. So let's keep on it. And where I'm anxious, as is Commissioner Beckner, I want to see this groundwork and this foundation there so we can take something solid to the public to make decisions on. Let the public make that decision.
Okay. Chairman Sharp?
Can just kind of reaffirm everything that the commissioner said, thinking about when Tom Phillips talked about the My Ride plan that was put together and how they went out with their standard questions and came back with what they kind of was a standard response. And then his administration looked at that and said, that's not what we want at all, and went back out and talked to over 10,000 people. It was an interesting case study involving Legos. They were going to leak, their business plan was collapsing, they were losing money. They went out, they interviewed a number of people to try to find out what was wrong. They came back with, kind of the standard response. The company said, this is not what we want. And they went out and they literally, tens of thousands of hours and really drilled down, looking at down to the kid who was using it. And they came up with a plan that worked. And I just really want to see something where we're asking a lot of questions, and sometimes it's the question you ask, how you ask the question, listening carefully, but making sure that we're really considering every element of transportation and transit, from literally the moment you wake up. The consumer that we're talking to today is very different than the one even 3 and 4 years ago. In the old days, you literally could just say, this is a service that we offer, this is what you get, would you use it? But now people are so used to making decisions and choices and having opportunities and knowing what's going on. We just got to really make sure that we're asking them what they want and how they might want it, and getting as much information as possible. So I agree with the mayor. Let's spend the money if we have to. And let's get a professional group that knows what they're doing.
Any other direction? Vice
I
Mayor
guess
White?
just to extend on that, I've been seeing a lot of surveys over the years come out, and I think it's good information. I think sometimes it's troubling when we take information from it and we say, well, that's the gospel, and that's exactly how we should make policy on it, because some of that information was leading, But like, for instance, when you talk about funding, thank you. When you talk about funding, just about every single time, the candidates that are chosen for the funding mechanism are the ones where the person that are choosing that candidate doesn't pay that fee. So they're always choosing options. Well, the best way to pay for this highway or this road or this rail, let's pick one that does not involve me paying it, okay? So why are we asking questions that's going to give us a result that's not realistic? So I think going down the road, Mary, you're heading to is let's make sure those questions are realistic and points us where it's data we can make solid decisions on, not feel good and give us information that we end up with. Well, we can't stick it to the man every time, or whoever it is. We have to be realistic in our funding sources. So I hope it's not leading questions. It's just open-ended that allows us to have solid evidence. We can make decisions based on those findings.
Yeah, our intent is to clearly have professional assistants who does this, to ask a very set of objective questions. They're going to provide information that will help you when we get to the point of where you're having to start to say projects and priorities and and all those things so that you have as much useful as information as we can for you. Again, we have a two-stage approach here, so, we'll double back and check. So, Commissioner Merman?
Thank you very much, and I agree with all the comments. I think it's great. I just wanted to ask you about the timing. We don't want to get pushback on our timetable that was presented to us by Mr. Merrill. So how do we move this forward in an expeditious fashion, doing it right and being sensitive to the right questions, having the right company? How are we going to do that?
What I'm asking today for y'all to authorize your respective managers to manage this process so that we can go ahead and get started in April, so that we don't have to wait. They'll obviously brief you and keep you up to date and get your perceptions
Okay, so we'll
on it.
get to see the tool, the
Sure.
questionnaire before you send it out, just
Yeah.
in case there's comments or maybe something that was
Sure.
missed.
Yeah, we don't want to move forward out, but what I'm trying to avoid is not being able to do anything until May 28th when I next meet with you. So,
So you're planning on starting this when?
well, we will start the discussions probably, well, we've already started the discussions, but we'll start the discussions for real next week in terms of, we're researching firms already,
Okay.
trying to get all that, to get everything lined up at the technical level we lined up. Then we
So
need to
you'll
have
be
it.
in the field, what, the end of April?
I would hope so.
So like
yeah.
for a whole month, or what's the duration? Am I asking too many questions here?
Well, you're asking questions I can't-
just
I
want to
can't.
get to the details.
I understand.
Those
But
of us
we're-
that have been the subject of
we're-
many surveys understand these
And I
questions.
understand, and we're dealing with issues like how can we procure things and procurement processes and how to make all this stuff work,
Right.
Ideally, and if I may answer it ideally and understand we don't always make the ideal, we would like to be able to begin surveying the very first of May, if not the last week of April. That would be our ideal, if we can get all the ducks lined up and everything done. You obviously need to have some chance to input. We want to build into that. But, a lot of this can happen fairly quickly and fairly intensively, and so that would be our goal.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask for two things. I spent, all of you, just two, all of us got to, had a chance to sit down with the chamber. And we've got to, choice riders are going to be the foundation of success, I believe, of whatever we're proposing. And getting them to want to ride transit to get wherever they want to go. And I do think businesses are a huge part of this. I mean, you put that on your economic development map, people along some of these routes, and I think it's critical. So can you get a firm to develop an app that the chamber could send to Chuck Sykes and have Chuck send to his employees, give them a deadline of like Friday to download the app and answer the questions that are on the survey? Can we do something like that? And I guess, I don't know if the chamber would agree to it, but I think that coming from them to the business leaders of the community, I think would be a critical element to get buy-in.
I'm going to assume that's not a technical problem. I guess I'd like to see some response from the rest of the folks if you're interested in something.
And then the other, let me do the second thing. I really would like to have personal outreach. I mean, I don't know if it's knocking on doors or going to the Starbucks on Big Bend Road, but personal outreach in these outlying areas. I think it is critical to get that feedback and not just plop a sign up on the road and say, please come to the community meeting, and you get the same people that come to every single meeting we have where the sign goes up. We've got to go into Publix. We've got to go to Starbucks and get a hold of these people in the outlying areas. Plant City, Temple Terrace, West Chase, New Tampa. That's my two things.
I'll handle the Starbucks circuit.
Oh, okay.
I got that covered. No
I
problem.
think
I thought it was gonna be sharp.
Buddy Brew. Yeah, let's just camp out at Buddy Brew.
I just wanted to convey to you that the Chamber Caucus Group is meeting Friday to address those exact
good.
points you're raising, and I think it is feasible within some, it's easier for the guy who doesn't have to do it, but within some technological constraints to do something like an app. But companies are really going to be key to this, because if they can incentivize employees to take transit by giving them, I don't know, a gift card for every number of transit trips they take, and if we can help them incentivize that, you're right, that's where the ridership's going to come from.
Exactly.
So my friend Ed Taranchik is here. He heads up the caucus, and he said that's going to be on their agenda on Friday. So
Well, it's creating demand before we actually put it into place. So I think that's got to be a goal instead of building it and hope they come, you know.
Mr. Beckner?
And I think that if we have the right firm that's going to be helping us administer surveys and gathering this data, that's probably, I mean, different ways to reach different groups should be what they should be advocating. If they're just advocating putting signs outside and holding public meetings, then I think you probably have the wrong firm. And I mean, when you're dealing with a county of 1.2 million people, you know, there's some people you may want to specifically target for hand-to-hand, but a good portion of it, we're going to have to rely on new technologies and ways to reach people as society changes the way that they communicate. So I would hope that we would be able to get a firm that would be able to help us facilitate that. And certainly I like the idea of the app, but let's just make sure that, and especially the questions that are going to be asked, as we have already discussed, is the right are the right questions that will gather the right data that we're looking for.
Any other comments or feedback?
Just
Chairman Sharp?
Just quickly, to piggyback on Commissioner Merman's point, and I think this kind of ties into the whole question about who ultimately is going to be the authority which does this, and the role and involvement of HART, and why it's so important for us to have a mission statement. You talked about economic development. I don't think HART sees itself as being an agent of economic development. It has a different mission. We're going to have to be very clear that a part of the mission of that agency is to drive economic development, job creation, to make sure that people who are working can get to work, and not in 2 hours, but in a time that, you know, can compete with taking your automobile. As long as it sees itself as an agency which just provides bus service to those who have no other option and alternative, we're not going to get there. So, you know, when we're trying to connect economic development points, you know, whether it's where you live to where you work, but we're still looking at this as if it doesn't really matter how long it takes, then this is all for naught. So I just want to make sure that as we're doing this, we need to have a very frank conversation about the organization that's going to be tasked with doing this, and then being very clear about what our expectations are, so that whether it's sports venues, commercial entities, work, whatever it is, that's a part of the mission. And there's no question in my mind that it can be part of the mission. There are those agencies which choose to interpret the rules to say we can't do it, and there are those out there that have done it and do it quite successfully. So I want to have that conversation.
We certainly.
Well, I think
when we-
if I can
Sorry.
interrupt that, and that goes to the funding sources too, because you can only do so much. You know, you can't have steak on a peanut butter and jelly budget, okay? So that's part of the problem. I mean, if you want steak, let's start paying for some steak. If you want peanut butter and jelly, that's what you're going to get. It's that simple. I mean, I tell this to the kids all the time, which is, hey, you know, why can't we have steak every day? It's because we don't have the budget to pay for steak every day. So if we want to talk about those type of options, and I agree with you 100%, then that means that the funding sources, how we deliver the services, are directly related to that funding source. And it goes back to the trust issue that we were talking about earlier, which is we built, as you know, as you're a member of the HART board, we built a BRT system for a lot less money than what we had originally asked, and it is performing phenomenally. The only BRT system in the state. So that's kind of what we have to look at, which is if we're trusted with the dollars, we're going to build the things that we need to build. In addition to, and this is something I've said previously, if we're going to do another entity, I would suggest that we look at a transit-oriented development entity that is in partnership with all of these governments, whether it's Plant City, Temple Terrace, the City of Tampa, the county, and we put money into that to make sure that we are developing those places specifically to transit options and multimodal facilities. If we don't do that, then all this discussion has meant zero, period. Thank you. That's all I have.
And let me say why, you see, Mike, remember Mike's 3 deliverables is why we have to look at them all together, because you've got to make sure you got the structure that's going to get the projects and has the funding. Commissioner
Well,
Bregman?
and I'll comment on that, that if we are looking for one superstellar authority that already exists that will focus on transit, focus on economic development, put everything together, you're not going to find it here. What I believe we absolutely need to be focused, I mean, it'd be like saying, you know, we said that Hart doesn't know economic development, and I would say that economic development doesn't know transit. And so I think the whole idea is to create a uniform collaboration where you have an entity that has the taxing authority, which I think is key right now, and you just expand the mind share. So you're bringing in everybody together. And my comments that I've been making all along should not be misconstrued that I'm looking to make Hart into a whole new entity with whole new staffing and we're getting rid of the MPOs and this. It's not that at all. It's about restructuring how the governance board works there so that there's a presence from each one of the crucial agencies at the table so their mind share can be present there and that we can work as a collaborative and not as an independent agency. And that's what I think we need to focus on, because we will spin our wheels by looking for the perfect entity that can do everything already, because it does not exist.
If I may, let me go back to my question of you. Are you okay with your managers taking responsibility for developing this public engagement approach? And they'll keep you briefed and informed. Okay. Seeing nobody saying no to me, I'm going to assume that. Any of your managers have any questions about
wait a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Sharp.
No, Mayor.
Oh, Mayor, excuse me, Mayor.
Only to the extent that when it comes to dealing certainly with political polling firms, that's not their forte.
Right.
And so I would suggest that, you have plenty, Mike, any one of your electeds here can be helpful to you in terms of figuring out the appropriate firm. That's not what, city managers and transportation people do. So I would just proceed cautiously. You have a wealth of talent here that can help you find the right firm and understand how to target the right demographic group.
And my assumption is your managers are going to be in conversations with you about this so that we draw upon your advice and make sure we're getting what you need to get out of it.
And we do have commission meeting on Wednesday, so if there's any question or that we need to iron out, we've got a short fuse to make sure that Mike has clear direction from the board.
We'll proceed on that. If Mike would like to clear further direction, or any other managers here would like direction, they can get with their bodies and get it. But for the moment, we'll continue working at our level, trying to get everything organized. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any other questions or comments you have for today? Hearing none, thank you very much. Appreciate it.